here we are. So Aaron, as you well know, hi, how are you? Friendly, local, neighborhood PJ. Today on the podcast, we have Kim Killer Chick Campbell. Ma'am, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's my honor. We were talking just before we got on here. I'm a bit of a fanboy. I've known your story since it happened as a young airman, and then young staff sergeant before I cross-trained back in a pararescue. So you were one of those people in the Air Force that I looked up to and sort of fanboyed a little bit over. So we're going to jump into that story now. But as always, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in the Air Force?
Yeah, sure. I decided when I was in fifth grade that I was going to be a fighter pilot. So this was kind of a lifelong dream for me. Yeah.
Fifth grade. That's awesome. We'll talk about it. I know your dad was actually in the Air Force too. Is it because, grew up in a military family, or where did that love of flight come from?
Actually my dad got out of the Air Force, when I was born, right around that same time. So I didn't grow up as an Air Force brat.
Okay.
But, I decided I was going to be a fighter pilot. This was 1986. And women weren't actually allowed to be fighter pilots then. So that was, I didn't know that, which was probably a good thing. And
right.
I talked to my dad, who by then I had figured out he had been in the Air Force. And he said, well, if you want to be a fighter pilot, and my ultimate goal was to go on to become an astronaut. And so he said, if that's something that you want to do, then a lot of those astronauts are pilots. A lot of the pilots come from the Air Force Academy. That's probably your best bet. And so I kind of took that to heart, and that was it. Like, I was on this mission that I was going to go to the Air Force Academy and become a fighter pilot.
Pretty good. 5 years old. You already had it locked down from...
Fifth grade, not 5 years old.
Okay.
Not quite that young.
That's still pretty early to figure out exactly what you wanted to do all the way through. So you show up at this academy, you get your service recommendation, and then you show up at the small technical school tucked into the Colorado Rockies, mostly for boys, that we know is the Air Force Academy. How hard was it when you showed up as a freshman to the Air Force Academy with these big dreams? Because now you're in competition land.
Yeah, well, I struggled to even get in. So I got rejected from the academy, my first attempt. And, so that meant that when I got there, it was like I was finally there, and I was so thankful to be there that I was just like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to be successful and work really hard. So, getting that rejection, which was painful because it was kind of everything that I had worked for. It turned out, I think, as a motivator for me, because at that point I was like, well, if they don't think I should be here, I barely made it in. I was like right down to the wire. They're like, well, somebody else turned down their appointment, so you can have it and you can show up. And that was like 2 weeks before basic training. So I was just very determined to do well, and really work hard, because you compete for pilot slots. And so I wanted to be at the top of my class to make sure that there was no doubt that I could go to pilot training.
We talk about using failure as a motivation all the time. That failure, that can fuel you. It gives you that immediate chip on your shoulder, and it makes you want to go compete against people. I loved hearing you say, like, you felt like you made it, and then you showed up as a freshman at the Air Force Academy. Those first couple of years as a plebe, not the most fun. What was your experience like as you went through those first 2 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. You finish high school, and almost everybody is at the top of their class. They are, they're elite in terms of they're elite athletes, or they're valedictorians, they're class presidents, and you show up and, well, now you're average, because everybody is like
everybody's
you.
a superstar, right?
Yeah. And so it's kind of this humbling experience. I mean, and then there's basic training, and you're at the bottom of the food chain anyway. But again, I think it comes down to just, one, you got to show up ready to go with the right mindset. And then the physical fitness is incredibly important for basic training. And so for me, it was all about, I was going to show up as ready as I could. And I worked out before I went, to the tune of running in my combat boots in the hills of San Jose, California. I installed a pull-up bar. My dad installed the pull-up bar in my bathroom so I could max out the pull-ups, and so it helps to show up ready. But you kind of start out and you're around people that are excellent. And so it is tough. It's a competition, but at the same time, like, you are not going to succeed unless you work together as a team. So it's a really interesting dynamic, because you are competing, but if you try to go solo, you will fail. You have to work together. So overall, like, I look back, I think I have forgotten a lot of the bad things, but I look back on my time at the academy as like this really great time where I met a lot of really incredible people that got me towards the goal that I wanted. It's been 25 years, so I've dumped a lot of those bad memories.
Well, it's funny how quickly our brain just shuts that off, and you're just like, oh no, this was a great time. When you're going through it, you're like, this is the worst time I've ever had. You know,
I don't really want to go through it again, right?
Absolutely not. Somebody, there's always the question like, okay, how do you think you would do an A&S? I'd be like, pass. No, I don't think I'd do well at all. I think I think I wouldn't even want to try at this point.
Yeah.
I do want to highlight something.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So you were a wing commander, a cadet wing commander. So you went from almost not getting in to being essentially the highest ranking student in your cadet wing. How did you feel? Did you feel like accomplished? Did you feel like, was that chip on your shoulder just kind of still like, I knew I could do this? Or how did you feel when you were in a leadership position as a student?
Yeah, I felt like I had earned my way there. You know, like I had worked really hard to get in, and there, you know, maybe my scores competing with everybody weren't quite as good. But SAT scores only get you so far. And then, you know, it's a lot of it's a lot more, certainly than that. And so I really did feel like, you know, I'd worked my butt off while I was there. And it was kind of like, look, you made the right choice, right? You allowing me to get into the academy, you made the right choice. So I felt, I guess, accomplished. And then also, you know, it wasn't, when I was a freshman, I actually got a call from the admissions office to go see the admissions office.
Oh, no.
Well, and of course, I was a freshman. I was totally worried. But I had actually sent them letters every week once I got that rejection letter to say like, hey, if somebody doesn't want their spot, I'm here, I'm ready, I'm available. And so they kind of knew me because I had sent these letters every week. So it was like they wanted to meet me and get to know me. So I felt like at that point, I'm like, all right, I earned my spot here.
Nice. And you actually got to share that with your dad. You were the first father and daughter wing commander pair that had ever happened. Is that true?
Yeah, it's pretty cool because my dad graduated with the class of 1970 and he was the wing commander when he was there. So to have that, you know, to walk down the hallway with all the pictures of the cadet wing commanders and like see my dad and then see me and realize like he still is. He's always been kind of my role model and my hero. And to achieve that same thing that he did was pretty cool.
What a fantastic thing from not even like realizing that he was in the Air Force to that evolution to sharing that had to be a big deal for you and your relationship. That's awesome. Good on the both of you.
Yeah.
So we graduate the academy in 97. You get your first assignment. When you tracked out of school, did you go immediately into UPT or how did that work?
I actually spent a few years in the UK. I went to grad school on a Marshall Scholarship program. So I spent 2 years as a second lieutenant, not wearing a uniform, studying in the UK. And what a fantastic experience. I mean, to get outside and see something from a different perspective and work with all these different international students was just a great way for me to broaden out a little bit. And then at the same time, I was so anxious to get back to pilot training because I was watching all my friends go through and they're getting the fighters and the things that they want. I'm anxious to get there. So 2-year delay due to grad school. But in the long run was the right choice to do that for sure.
Where in the UK did you go?
I went to the University of Reading first for a degree in international security studies. And then I did an MBA at the University of London.
Oh, nice. Peaches and I both spent time at the 321st down at Milton Hall. So familiar with that area. Yeah. So 2 years behind you. Now you're an accomplished grad school graduate. You're super duper smart. And now you're ready to actually get into pilot training.
Yeah. So I'm anxious to get to pilot training.
And once again, we step in on a kind of like day one, like, hi, I've got this degree now. And now I'm 2 years kind of behind my peer group as far as pilots go. And you show up. How did you prepare at all for UPT? How did you keep yourself on track in those 2 years?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit hard to prep completely because you can do some studying and things, but until you're in it, it's really hard to kind of know what's going to go on and know really how to prep yourself. And I think the thing for me is I went in with this like, I hadn't spent, I wasn't just at the academy. I had time to kind of decompress from that experience and really just, I was energized and I was ready and ready to like study and really commit to it. And so I really just, I showed up there and I was ready to go. I mean, I was just going to work my butt off to get the fighter that I wanted. Because again, I knew that was going to be competitive to get a fighter pilot slot.
Right. And which fighter did you want? Was it always the A-10?
No, I didn't know what I wanted at the time when I started. I didn't, I was like this idea. I wanted to go fly fighters, but I didn't really know which one. And it took me really, 6 to 9 months of really just talking to other pilots and learning about the missions and then flying when I realized that like the formation work, the close in formation work, it was cool. I mean, don't get me wrong, but it was like, okay, that's cool. But then we got to the low levels and I was like, ooh, this is fun. I like this. And pilot training, you're not like, you're not dropping bombs or shooting the gun or anything like that. It's just very basic. So you don't really get into that. But I talked to a lot of pilots and I realized for me, that mission of close air support was it just resonated with me. It was like, so my primary mission is to go support these guys on the ground and get them home safely to their families. Like I can relate to that. Like that's something that I want to do.
Okay. Well, we sort of breezed right by this one, but when you got into the Air Force Academy, you didn't even know, when did the exclusion for female fighter pilots happen? Like when did that go away?
So that went away my senior year in high school. So 1993, when I graduated high school. So yeah, I mean, I didn't really know about it. And I think senior year in high school, I had this recognition. I was actually in a debate class and we were talking about women in combat. And so it was like, oh, wait a second, this thing I want to do, I'm not actually allowed to do it right now. But thankfully it was lifted. There were women that came before me that, kind of got the first knocked out of the way, which is always nice.
Always good. Yeah. You never want to be the first. I'd rather be a good fifth than a first.
Yeah. Well, and there was a lot of initial struggles. So there weren't a lot of women when I showed up anyway. I mean, I was in a handful of maybe a couple women anyway, but it was nice that there were women that went before me.
Yeah, that paved the way. So we're getting through UPT. You do well. You make the decision and you go A-10. What was your first flight like in the A-10?
It takes a little bit to get there because we got to go through survival training and water survival and all those fun things. But, so it was about 6 months after I graduated from pilot training and I went on to A-10 training at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. And you do so much preparation leading to it because the A-10 is single seat. I mean, there are no flyable 2-seat A-10s. And so the first time you fly, you're by yourself. So there's a lot of preparation, a lot of simulators before. The first time you fly is actually fairly like basic. You're not doing a lot. You're going to go out, you're going to do some instrument work. But that moment of taking off and like, it's like the second of, you're excited for about a second and then it's total focus on what you're doing.
Right.
But you're really not an A-10 pilot till you shoot the gun. So you got to knock out like 8 flights and then you go shoot the gun and you're like, okay, now I've made it.
And now I've made it.
Now I can wear the patch.
Fantastic. We talk about that a lot. Like you think you've made it. There's all these times in your career. Every once in a while, I'll throw my beret on and I'll go to walk into a building or something. And I'll have this distinct feeling of like, oh crap, you're a PJ.
Yeah.
Like, holy cow, okay, cool. I imagine the first time you rip off a couple squeezes of that 30 millimeter, I imagine that for you, that was the same thing.
Yeah. You're like, okay, this fighter pilot thing that I've always wanted to do, like, I've got it, like I'm here, but then you land and then you debrief and you're like, I still have a long way to go.
Right.
It's like the next thing, I got to get combat mission ready. I've got to become a flight lead, an instructor, go to combat. It just, I don't know that it ever ends.